My next guest is Amy Valentine. Amy has been called a social rabble rouser, a turnaround strategist, and fighter of the status quo in K 12 education. She has served as a teacher, trainer, administrator, and executive director overseeing a network of schools. Amy is a staunch supporter of educators, a believer in the promise of new technologies, and remains above all an irrepressible optimist on system level change. She leads Future of School, a national education organization dedicated to bringing all kids learning opportunities into the 21st century. Amy has appeared on stage at DLAC and INACOL and in dozens of panels sharing insights on digital learning, equity, and access. Later on in the podcast, Amy's son, Kai Valentine, will also be joining us. Kai is a seventh grade student at Aspen View Academy, a charter school in Douglas County, Colorado. His hobbies are playing basketball, baseball, and swimming. Welcome to the podcast, Amy.
Hi, Dana. It's great to be here.
So tell me about a time when you were in the trenches early on in your career and how you managed to crawl out of that situation.
Yeah, I have a few examples that come to mind, but one that's most prominent, it was my first year of teaching high school. And so I'm not going to say the year so I don't date myself, but it was a while ago. And I I had taught college as a TA, and so I didn't follow a normal pathway where I was trained as a high school teacher. Instead, I was offered a position in a rural school and did completed an alternative licensure program. So I was literally learning the fundamentals of teaching as I was going through the school year. So I had always, been a people person and loved communicating and have a heart as a teacher. But the infrastructure pieces I was learning, and I, as a new teacher in the school, and class rosters were made, I was, given the most challenging students, and
Mhm.
I had within the first month of school, I had a student who had been labeled by my colleagues as, one of the bad kids, uncontrollable, out of control, lazy. He was in my class and he got really frustrated and he exploded in class and he threatened to kill me. And that was hard for me because not because he threatened to kill me because I knew he didn't want to hurt me. It was challenging because I knew that was a cry for help from him.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I felt like I was already in the trenches of, learning and trying to figure this out. And I was, I don't even say knee deep. I was underground. I was underwater trying to, figure out delivering on, accommodations and, education law. And then this happened. And so I got out of that trench. And actually that situation taught me a lot more about that one student because I sat down with him after he was suspended and we met with his family. I sat down with him and we had a conversation and very frank conversation around you can transfer to another class or you can stay in my class and we can wipe the slate clean.
Mhm.
And it was my instinct and my intuition and my desire to um, do right by him
Mhm.
and not to hold a grudge, but also set really firm boundaries with him. And he stayed in my class that year. He had his moments. It wasn't like all of a sudden he was transformed into being the best behaved student, but we worked together on how to manage that. And we ended up staying in touch through the years. And about 7 years later, out of the blue, he got a hold of me and he he was experiencing the most difficult situation of his life. His only sibling had died in a tragic motorcycle accident, and he asked me if I would meet him to read the eulogy because he wanted to do right by his brother. And of course I did. Of course, we got to reconnect and catch up, and I was able to be part of his support network. But I always knew that the impact of a teacher could never be measured. But when something like that happens, you realize when you pull yourself out of the trenches professionally to grow and you
Mhm.
help pull a kid out of the trenches who's been labeled, what happens is you can't even imagine what that does for your life.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so inspiring just to hear that, despite having the difficulties in that first year of teaching and, not being prepared to teach high school after having gone through that alternative licensure program, that you were able to make such an impact on this student's life, that you were the person that he called right after his brother had died. And,
Yeah.
you were somebody that he felt he could lean on and help with the eulogy. So, a lot of first year teachers seem to be handed the most difficult groups of students, right? But I don't often hear of, having, that one student that you remember necessarily during the first year. So, it's inspiring to hear how that came out of, your first year. That is often the most difficult. We talked in the intro about you leading Future of School. Can you please tell a little bit about what Future of School does and what led you to start the organization?
Absolutely. I'll try not to take too long because this is something I could talk to you for a few hours about, Dana, and your listeners. So I encourage people to check us out to find out more. We are a national education organization. We are shifting into the public charity space, and it is our goal to be the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the American Heart Association entity for teachers and students to be able to access personalized learning pathways and quality programs that work for them. And so people have asked, oh, did Future of School, did you launch, when the pandemic hit in March? And I smile and I say, no, we've been doing this work for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
We give scholarships to kids who have taken online and blended classes, who want to go on to any type of post-secondary setting, vocational, tech, trade, community college, four-year university. And we gather their stories because their experiences having taken online and blended classes makes the difference in people's perception of traditional teaching and learning
Mm-hmm.
and innovation. And so, we have proof of concept of how it works and how it benefits kids. In fact, in this year's cohort, we had several students say the only aspect of their life that didn't change when COVID-19 hit was their education because they were taking online and blended classes through their district.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one arm of our program. The second is giving grants to teachers who are innovating in the classroom. So again, pre-March 2020, we had a small group of applicants. I imagine we're going to have an exponential increase in applicants because of remote learning and crisis schooling.
Mm-hmm.
We also publish impact reports and research reports. And then we serve to be a conduit, a connector of sorts, where people can go to learn, share, and grow as they consider what the future of school could look like and take an active role in building it as a movement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of different branches of the organization, and I'll definitely put in the links to your site. And is there an opportunity there for teachers then to apply for those grants on the website? And is it laid out kind of the criteria for the grants?
Yeah, what we did this spring was we took our research grants and our teacher grants and we combined it for this fall to
Okay.
provide grants for districts and schools. And that's called the Resilient Schools Project. So that's a membership-based cohort that we fund to bring school leaders together to be able to address the most pertinent, most timely issues they're facing right now. So we did do that kind of larger scale program. We will be reopening our teacher grant program in the spring. So they can find out more on our website. There's also examples of educators who have won awards. They are grants of up to $10,000. And it's for educators who have an entrepreneurial spirit, who want to transform their classroom with a blended learning model. And so what we do is we fund the blended learning supports needed, whether it's professional development, training, and then we also fund the technology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whether it's whether it's an interactive whiteboard, whether it's Chromebooks. So you have to have both of those components. You have to have a plan in place for how that this is going to be blended learning, and then the tech need or the software need, and then we fund that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely something a lot of teachers will need. We've had the whiteboards all the time, but not everybody has Promethean boards. Using other tools. Also, once we start bringing more and more schools back in person, that's definitely a resource that a lot of teachers, I'm sure, will want to apply for. And tied into Future of Learning, you're talking a little bit about professional development that you provide. Tell me a little bit about what's starting up in the fall now in November, December, and January 2020, and what you hope to provide to educators. And you also have some podcast episodes as well.
Yep, exactly. So what we did this summer was we spent a lot of time with our ear to the ground, trying to understand, what do educators need, what do leaders need, what do parents need, what do all of these stakeholder groups need? And they all need very different things, and some of them need similar things. So we said we have proof of concept of how new ways of teaching and learning work for kids.
Mhm.
And I've said, I feel like I've said this about 400 times since March, but I'm going to say it again for your audience. Online learning is not new to America. Instead, it's new to most Americans.
Yeah.
And what we've experienced with, this spring and summer wasn't true online learning. It was crisis schooling or the quick implementation of remote teaching and learning. And so what we did this summer was we said, okay, we have all of these list of needs. So what can we do to reach out to as many stakeholder groups as possible? And so we put together a communications campaign that includes a podcast series, which will have some brief intros of the podcast coming out in the next month.
Mhm.
And then we'll launch the full series starting in January. And it will also be real time. So we're recording them now, but we'll also be doing some recordings in January too. And that podcast is called Future of School Podcast. We kept it really aligned with our name. And we have students on there. We have educators, thought leaders. We have students interviewing teachers. The structure is different, and it's really an amazing conglomeration of voices. So we have that. We also will be rolling out our Moving from the Margins webinar series. We will have 3 to 4 webinars from now until the end of December. And those will be focused on the hot topics and most critical issues. So right now on the books, we have plans for the next conversation around delivering high quality instructional support and services to special education students. Also, we're going to be forecasting some trends for 2021 for the next semester to help school leaders and teachers get ahead of the game in terms of what to expect. And the final one will be around career readiness. We want to spend some time talking to parents and business leaders and educators as well about what are the benefits of this rapid, quick shift that we've seen in terms of college and career readiness. And so we want to talk about what the benefits will be and how we can better align skills for the workforce. And that's been a conversation that's been happening for years. It's just been very slow going. And so now we can talk about those 21st century skills as relevant to the workplace.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to see maybe how much more time some students have been able to spend maybe with internships, whether they be virtual or in person, since a lot of high schoolers are remote or in a hybrid setting. They're having the extra time to go out and explore those trades. So yeah, that would be interesting to hear about come springtime and even, in the fall next year of, what kind of practice they've had in the fields and how they've been able to explore trades more than prior, because they were always so bogged down with classes 5 days a week before. So the pandemic is a blessing in disguise in some ways.
I mean, I'm a firm believer in the silver linings theory. And, the traditional education system has existed one way, and it's not a bad way at all. And it works for many kids. But what we've seen is as society has evolved and changed to be more tech enabled and more interconnected, so we see that kids learn differently. And the one size fits all is one that needs to be reconsidered. And technology is what allows us to do that.
Well, tell me a little bit about Future of Schools work with families and guiding them through their home learning environments. You've talked to me about how you're really passionate about that. And then we'll lead into talking about an article that you wrote about the experience with your son.
Sure. So all of our webinars, podcasts, events that we host, and also the other side of that, invitations to speak to stakeholder groups, all of those are free. We make those available to, like I said, to parents, to legislators, to educators, to thought leaders. So all of that's available for free on our website. All of our research reports are free. All of the storytelling of what amazing things students and teachers have done through our grant programs are on our website as well. And so we definitely connect with families that way. Also, there'll be from time to time a family will, they'll reach out to me for advice or for perspective. And I've always spent time with parents that call me on the phone or educators, because if someone's reaching out and they're taking the time to gather resources for their child or for their children, I value that so much. I value that from having been a teacher in the classroom, and I also value that from being, my role as a parent and the advocacy that I've done for my son. And so we do that as well. It is my, you know, as we grow and scale our organization, one of the top positions that I want to bring on board is a parent coordinator or a family coordinator that can do even more. They can have more sessions, they can have more resources, they can be that point person to really cultivate and develop programs geared towards parents and their children.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's so important, not only for educators supporting organizations like yours, but also for many schools, to have that parent liaison. And there are so few places that actually hire people that can coordinate with families. And I think hopefully after everything goes semi back to normal, that a lot of districts will see that this is something that's really needed, either at the district level or at individual school levels. You also wrote an article um, back in 2017, April of 2017, in Chalkbeat, Colorado, called Fighting the Good Fight. Tell a little bit about what your son was diagnosed with in 2016, and the fact that you never had experience. You were a Spanish teacher. You didn't have many kids that had IEPs and 504. So, what was it like getting this diagnosis and then learning about how to support your son?
Yeah, I mean, I have to smile and laugh a little bit, because looking back, it felt like the biggest example of Murphy's Law that I've ever seen, where it's the one thing, I've dedicated my career to education. I've been a strong advocate for school transformation and for new pathways of learning. And when in the second grade, my son was struggling in school, and his teacher said, he's lazy, he's not trying hard enough, because he couldn't or wouldn't write. He knew the information in his head, but writing it became a challenge for him. I thought that I don't know, there's a whole nother world of education that I don't know about. And so I did, as a lifelong learner, I did what I've always done, which is, if I don't know what it is, I'm going to find someone who can help me. And so I worked with a neuropsychologist in Denver who did a full education evaluation of him. And she uncovered that he has dysgraphia. And how I describe that to people is that dyslexia is to reading what dysgraphia is to writing. So it's an articulation struggle where the brain doesn't communicate with the hand in a way that allows you to write at the rate and pace that you know the information. And so it was a long road. I mean, the teacher in second grade that said those things about him, I left him in her class after he was diagnosed shortly thereafter, and the school was going to switch him teachers. And I said, no, I want him to stay with her.
Mm-hmm.
It's important that he stays with her, because she needed to figure out how to work with kids that were outside, that were on the margins, kids that weren't, this average student that doesn't even exist, but who pretty much exemplified the opposite of average. And he needed to figure out how to show up and overcome labels. And so as a parent, it wasn't the easiest decision, but it was the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
And we communicated. I never held a grudge against her. I mean, certainly, you get a little mama bear. You want to make sure, that he's being treated fairly. But the only way he truly would have been treated fairly is if he stayed in her class and gave it a shot. And so the last day of school, she cried and I cried, and we were just so proud of each other and him. And so I wrote the article because what I learned in that year, in his second grade year, which was going to serve me very well, because it's still a long road, was most people didn't know what it was. And so if you don't understand what something is, it's very easy to default to what you know, which is, okay, well, this is some, label that he has, but he could do better. And so I always worked with the school. I was committed to working with the school, even when people, even when they, in third grade, when they kept him out of recess for his extended time for his 504, to him, that was a punishment, because recess is his, that's his expression time. That's his time to get out there. And so anytime that, what would be a violation or, a blatant disregard or however we want to label it, I looked at it like they don't understand. And so I did everything from bringing in his neuropsychologist into the school to explain how his brain thinks to his teachers, to bringing the district in to provide support to the school when they were in a year of transition with leadership,
Mhm.
to make sure he didn't slip through the cracks, to getting special gifts for his teachers, getting them Starbucks gift cards, or, back in the day when you could make them cookies,
Mhm.
doing things because I knew it was extra work on them to deliver on his 504. And so I came from a place of appreciation and sharing information and educating them and not feeling entitled and never not feeling like, oh, I should switch him schools. Him being in a different school probably would have benefited him being in a hands-on experiential school, but he was so tied to his friends and to that community that I had to do what was more difficult and challenging, which was reframe my thinking and start to kind of step away from looking at these traditional, like switching schools or hiring a tutor. It was like, no, I got the interventions he needed, but
Mhm.
then I fastidiously and continuously and unabashedly stayed on top of it. Like I learned as a parent how important staying on top of your child's education is, and never assuming that even if they get an A on something, or even if they say that, they're doing well, not assuming that. The way that that is by remaining plugged in with your ear to the ground
Mhm. Mhm.
in
Mhm.
that environment. So
I wanted to point out a quote from the article. It is a parent's responsibility to be involved, to embrace the struggle, and to demonstrate how collaboration and cooperation can yield much, much more than anger, blame, or avoidance ever will. Please explain how you came to this conclusion. You were kind of talking about, staying on top of it, keeping your ear to the ground.
well, I think honestly, it was in part guided by him, because my inclination originally was, well, we're going to find a different school. We're going to find a school that's better suited, a private school or a school that's, designed for kids that learn differently. And when we would talk about it, he would say it was so important to him to stay at that school. He could have said, yeah, I want to go to a different school.
Mhm.
And we wouldn't have had the kind of growth that we've had. So a lot of it was talking to him too and hearing him, and then saying, okay, if you're going to stay at Aspen View, then what needs to change is what I can control. And what I can control is making sure that I understand you and that your teachers understand you and that they deliver the fundamentals of your 504. I never wanted a 504 that had 15 modifications on it. I wanted like 2 or 3. And so it was a lot about like recognizing and understanding the different perspectives. And I mean, don't get me wrong, because things would happen and they would really challenge me. Like when the substitute teacher, who didn't know anything about dysgraphia and didn't have his 504, mocked his handwriting in class and told the kids not to be like him because he wrote so slow. I mean, no teacher should treat any kid, whether they have a learning disability or not, like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And I literally went into the school and told the principal that I had his 504, and I said, I want every modification taken off, and I just want the word grace to be written on here.
Mhm.
Have some grace, have some, understanding. And so there were times that I definitely got pushed to the limit of that. Um, but it was never from anger or frustration. It was from maybe a little bit of frustration for those things that just shouldn't happen in any educator's class, in anyone's
Mhm.
classroom.
Mhm.
But it was knowing and recognizing that you get a lot farther with sugar than you do with vinegar,
Mhm.
and that their jobs are hard. Ever since I was in the classroom, I feel like each year teachers' jobs have gotten not twice as hard, but they get exponentially more difficult, especially now.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
when remote learning hit, I didn't even, I didn't even bring up his 504. My thing was, he's home. It gave me the opportunity of him being home in the spring to focus on the quality of work, right? It's
Mhm.
like, okay, well, this is what you're responsible for. And so it gave me a chance to coach him and give him support in that way. But I wasn't even concerned about his 504 because the teachers were dealing with so much.
Mhm. Well, we'd like to bring Kai on now, so
Okay.
we'll take a quick break. So I have Kai Valentine on now, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about kind of your experience throughout your school journey. And did it take a while for you to get diagnosed with dysgraphia?
So yeah, sort of. So throughout kindergarten and first grade, I was struggling with handwriting abnormally, and so we went to a doctor, sort of, and we got me tested, and I was diagnosed with dysgraphia in like second grade.
So what did that feel like when you got diagnosed? Was it kind of a um, just a relief to know that there was something a label for what you were struggling with?
Um, I don't really remember, but yeah.
So what are your favorite subjects in school and or your favorite subject and what's your least favorite subject and why?
My favorite subject is probably science because it's more hands-on and it's a better learning experience for other people or probably just me because hands-on is more activities
Mhm,
and
mhm.
I focus better when we have activities. So, and my least favorite one is probably math because math or writing because I struggle with those the most and I've practiced, but I'm just not the greatest at them.
Okay. How was remote learning for you? And now that you've gone back into school in person 5 days a week, how was the transition going back for you?
We had a big break in between, so that was a relief, but the transition was different because I wasn't used to going on in school
Mhm,
building for a while and going online and staying from home and doing work was very be hard at the beginning because I wasn't like figuring stuff out and I wasn't that good at it. But it got easier, and by the end, by like the last month, I was liked it a lot more than regular school.
mhm, mhm. And how is it going back into the school building now and getting used to kind of those expectations since it had been such a long time?
It was different. Um, I think it was hard for a lot of people going back into school because it was a huge transition, but I handled it pretty well. I don't see much of a difference.
Just the masks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit in the pre-chat about prior to this year, you were using some software where it was a tablet and it was kind of a text to speech software. But this year, you decided not to use that software. Do you have to work harder when you're not using the software? And how do you feel about kind of taking on that extra work?
Um, I stopped using the dictation software halfly because it was embarrassing and halfly because it was, in my opinion, it was harder than
Mhm.
that. Um, Most of the time it would like misread and I would have to go back and say delete.
Oh,
But
okay.
now it's actually a lot easier than the dictation software. But yeah.
Tell me about a teacher who's made an impact on you and why.
Um, a teacher named Mrs. Winter
Mhm.
because she was very tough on me at the beginning. She was calling me out. She called me lazy, but it took me a while to realize I've had her twice. I had her in second grade and fourth grade.
Mhm.
And second grade, she was really tough on me and specifically me. And in fourth grade, I realized that she was pushing me for a reason to get me better at academics and learning. And it made me a better student because of her.
Mhm. Yeah, and you kind of had that advantage that she already knew about you from second grade, and she knew what you were capable of. So she kind of pushed you to do your best, right?
Yeah.
Out of everything we've talked about on the podcast, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember about working with students that have dysgraphia?
Um, I would like them to know to never give up because it's a practicing thing. When you're diagnosed with dysgraphia, it's not necessarily forever. If you practice and get yourself out of that hole, then everything will become a lot easier, I guess.
Well, it was great having you on the podcast today. Amy, what's one thing in particular you'd like listeners to remember from this podcast chat?
One thing that I would love for them to remember is that every challenge and every obstacle has a silver lining, even if we can't see it in the moment. And related to education, learning is at the core of the human spirit, and together we can accomplish so much, not even especially when we're in difficult times and unknown times. So I would just encourage people to look at the bright side and to pave a path forward of what new school will look like.
Yeah, that's so inspirational to remember. It's, like we said, there is a silver lining to what we're experiencing. And I think there's a lot of good that will come out of, what we've been doing for the past, 8 months now almost. So where can people find you online and learn more about Future of School?
Yes, they can find us on our website. It's futureof.school. So they can come to our website to find more. My contact information is on there. We're building a presence on Twitter, and they can follow us at futureof_school. They can follow me at Amy Valentine 555. We also are on Facebook. We have a page called Future of School Stories, which people are welcome to join. And we're also on LinkedIn as well.
Great. Well, it was so nice having both of you on the podcast today. I want to thank you. And it was great talking to you as well, Kai. Really interesting learning about your experience.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.